Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of the Indieheads Podcast. I'm your host, Matty, at Monrovian Prince on Twitter. On this episode of the podcast, we have...
Lily, at _Earthrise on Twitter. I barely know what day it is. Like, as far as I'm concerned, it's somewhere after November and before Christmas. I'm sure I'll figure it out when Christmas hits, but it's going to be a nice surprise.
Dylan, I'm at Slime Feast on Twitter. Hi. Hello. How are you doing? Well, I hope you're doing well.
Again, ASMR.
And
sorry, go ahead.
Good stuff, Dill. And this is Zach. If you don't recognize my voice, fair enough. It's been 6 months. You can find me at Waffle113 pretty much everywhere. So I'm back. It's good again. Woo!
Yes. Yes.
We just discovered. I think it's a testament to your presence on the podcast that we didn't realize you hadn't been on for 6 months. Like, you just feel like you're always there. It's good.
Oh, I thought that was... Never mind.
Again, now that we have Zach here, before we get into our main topic tonight, Zach, Wrestle Kingdom 13, Tanahashi versus Omega. Who are you think is going to win?
I think it's going to be Tanahashi, and I haven't really watched much New Japan, but I think it's going to be Tanahashi because apparently Omega's been underwhelming, and I don't know what I'm talking about, Matty. I'm sorry, but I think it's going to be Tanahashi. I don't know.
That's, again, it could go either way. It basically just depends on like what the contract situation is for Kenny. It's like it'll probably end up being Tanahashi just because it's sort of a last sort of like, hey, this is probably gonna be your last main event at the Tokyo Dome, so it's got to be. Okay, anyway, wait, this is an indie music podcast. This is an indie music podcast. I'm sorry that we had to insert some Slammy Horror Daddy stuff in there real quick, but again, we are doing
Episode 2 coming at some point.
Hopefully a Wrestle Kingdom episode, but nonetheless, here we are, Podcast Awards Part 2, the Album of the Year cast. We're finally here. We're at the end of the year. We're going to recap our favorite records of 2018. Of course, how we did it was everyone put in their top 10. We then calculated the points. So number 1 is 10 points, number 2, 9 points, 3, 8 points, so on and so on. So you get to number 10, which is 1 point. And then from there, tally the votes. And now we have our collective top 10 of 2018. And folks, like I said in the last episode, this is in terms of the albums that are on here, it's not that different because a lot of albums on here, I mean, they have overlap with a lot of the big lists that have come out so far this year. But what's interesting is the placement. I think our placement of some of these albums is going to be interesting. Some is like, oh, okay, it makes sense why it's there. And then some, it's like, oh shit, they're really giving that album high praise, which I'm very excited about, as I do think this is probably my favorite top 10 that we've done thus far, I would say. There's a lot of really good albums here, a lot of really unique stuff. And I think represents the overall taste spectrum of the podcast, the best of all of our year-end lists thus far. So let's just get right into it. Number 10, Lily, what is number 10 on our top 10 albums of 2018?
Number 10 is Sophie. Oil of Every Pearl's on Insides. I can't, ever since I learned the double meaning for the title, I try and read both at once and it never works. I feel like if you want to do the double meaning, which is I love every person's inside, you have to say the album in a Cockney accent. I love every, it doesn't scan.
Oh, every pearl on inside. I'm so
Yeah, this album just, the title demands to be recited like a Dickensian beggar. This album, this album is really not one I thought Sophie had in her. It's almost hard to remember, given how hard I championed this album, that I was not really into Sophie at all prior to this. I thought Product was okay, 1 or 2 good tracks, but to me it mostly fell into the PC music fuzz that just never really grabbed me. And while I did enjoy Ponyboy and Face Shopping, those were okay. It's this much stronger version of what Sophie was before. I didn't necessarily have faith that would translate into a full album, and yet it does, despite the kind of odd structuring of this album. She's just so focused all throughout this project in a way that she really never has been throughout her career, and really you can tell she's working with intention, and that comes through really strongly. And that intention is if I had to summarize this album, I'm going to quote myself. I think in the chat a few weeks ago, I called this the Michael Bay's Transformers of Trans Girl Fuck albums. And like I fully stand by that statement. I think that's about it. This thing is like trans women have never had an album to latch onto that is like this expensive, this loud, this obnoxious, and this like such a disregard for like human life. This album is absolutely not self-conscious in any way, and I think that's a really like necessary and galvanizing thing about it, and part of why it impacted me so hard, because you know, like a lot of albums by trans people that cross over, I'm not going to say into the mainstream necessarily, but to sort of cross over and get big in this way, like do sort of fall into the like tragedy porn genre. I think Anoni fell into that a little bit, which is unfortunate. And like, this finally is the album where like we just get to like have fun and not give a shit and feel affirmed, and like it's goofy and campy, but it also like is very rife with trauma and pain and sadness. But it balances those things in a way that makes this like a really three-dimensional, rounded listen. And I think that's a really valuable thing in 2018 when we're moving into this like new era of visible transness. And so to have stuff like Immaterial and Whole New World is really, really awesome, because surprisingly, that's not something that's been done very much, and certainly not on this scale. So for it to not only accomplish that, but accomplish it on like this level where this many people are listening to it and getting into it and latching onto it is like really, really awesome. I listened to this album a ton when it came out and did not think it would rank that highly on my list, but then it ended up at like 4th place. It was in my top 5 because I went back to it and I was like, yeah, this just defined the year for me in a huge way. This was like a really important album to me personally, and I'm glad it made our top 10, because it is not for everyone. Where did everybody go? That might have been the longest.
Sorry. My mom came in the room. She was asking me about how, again, if my girlfriend got her flight out yet. Sorry.
Important updates, folks.
Important updates about again. This is no longer the Indieheads Podcast. This is officially my girlfriend podcast. We only talk about.
It's always been that.
We only talk about Elizabeth and Elizabeth only. But I will give some. Like I said, I will admit I have not given this album the time of day that I deserved. And actually was sort of a. I think like. I would say our top 5, top 6 or 7 was pretty much guaranteed, like by the time that we started doing voting. But it was definitely this bottom part, and Sophie was definitely like a last minute kind of like, oh, this got up there, because I think it was bouncing between Sophie, Adrian Lenker, and Father John, and Sophie just barely beat out Father John Misty. So you're welcome that we did not include Father John Misty on this list, even though I do like that album quite a bit.
It was so close.
But nevertheless,
it was so close.
So close. I actually was doing the schedule. I was like, wait, is FJM on the list? Like, did it make it? What? But it was just some. Like I said, I have not given this album quite the time of day it deserves. I think I was trying to listen to it a few weeks ago, but I will say, like, the streak from like It's Okay to Cry to Face Shopping is fucking nuts. Like, It's Okay to Cry, which is like this like really soft, you know, ballad. It's just sort of this, you know, it's like a hair metal ballad kind of, but with like a more electronic tinge to it, and it's really nice. Yeah. And then it goes into Pony Boy, which is like it's so filthy. You're like, what is going on? And then it goes into Face Shopping, which is like just disturbing. You're like, what is happening on this album? It's one of the most, like, for me, one of the craziest opening streaks on any album that's dropped this year, in terms of just like the absolute whiplash that Sophie puts you through off the bat. And then of course, like, Immaterial is a fucking great song. Like, it's a fucking anthem. So
yeah, and the midsection I don't think gets talked about enough in relation to those opening singles, because again, as far as like Sophie displaying a really impressive range on this album, tracks like Is It Cold in the Water and Pretending are just like not something I ever thought we'd see from her. I thought we'd get like Pony Boy and Bip times 1,000. It's like, where did this come from? This is really unbelievable that you're pulling this off.
I feel like some of it is part of just sort of the distance from the PC music scene. Like, I think that's sort of a big thing with it, as like, I mean, PC music, I think the reason why, like, they're definitely not as relevant as they used to be is that they're very much they're anti-album, singles only, and I think that strategy is sort of, it was, I mean, at the beginning of the 2010s, I think that was that was not a bad prediction to make, like, oh yeah, albums are going to die out, but as streaming services gain more popularity, it became very apparent that, like, oh yeah, albums are actually still, like, pretty big, and it's still a pretty important way to express yourself as a musical artist, and I think Sophie's sort of going. I think, like I say, this is on Warp, right?
Oh, that's a good question.
I think it's self-released actually, or
Oh
someone else
yeah, it's on
is
her. It's on her own
handling
label.
Okay. It says Future Classic,
Yeah.
so it's probably
Someone else is handling the vinyl rollout, I believe.
okay. And also just I think part of it, like with the self-release, it's just like you kind of can get away with that more. Basically, as long as you have a good PR team, you're good to go. You don't really need like a label unless the label has PR. Anyways, nonetheless, this is industry talk. All right, this is industry talk. Let's talk about the album. But yeah, like I said, this album is I want to try to revisit a bit more, like over my break, because again, like the songs I've heard, of course, I really love, and I'm very glad to have it on this list at number 10. Sophie, Oil of Every Pearl's Unsides, and number 9. This being on here,
real quick, just want to throw in one thing. That's Grammy Award nominated album.
Oh yeah,
Oil of Every Pearl's Unsides to you.
Was it nominated for electronic, or was it like best album packaging or something like that?
I think it was. I think it got an electronic nomination.
That's so bananas.
Let me check really quick, because I remember hearing about that. I'm like, wait for. I assume, because usually if it's like those like kind of nominations for Grammys, it's usually like best album packaging. It's just like the random token awards. Like I think the let's see, I'm trying to remember who. There's someone who won it in like 2017, 2016. Now it was just like completely random. But let me check this real quick. Let's see. So
I think Cyro won Electronic of the Year for like 2014, 2015, something like
shit,
that.
Yep, Best Danceless Electronic Album, Oil of Every Pearl's Insides. All right, shit. Grammy nominated Sophie. So, sorry, Sophie, I know we just went on the spiel about you, but because you've been nominated for a Grammy, you're off the list. You're not indie. We can't include you. I apologize.
Adrian, I think our new number 10. I'm deciding it right now.
I think 3 out of the 5 albums that we're talking about tonight are Grammy nominated. I'm like 90% sure.
Yeah, you're correct.
This is actually Again, but speaking of one of those non-Grammy nominated albums, Zach, what is our number 9 pick for album of the year?
Our number 9 album of the year is my actual number 1 album of the year, Double Negative by Low. And I'm leading this discussion. It's probably not going to go very well because I'm still not very good at articulating my thoughts on this album. I gave it my best effort. I wrote a whole lot about it. It's going to be up on the sub tomorrow, so be on the lookout for that. But I guess the thing that comes to mind for me when I think about this album is this album just sounds like 2018 to me. Like all of the bullshit about like everything with the politics, our environment collapsing, all of that, the isolation. I listen to this album and I think of all that because that's just the landscape this album evokes to me. Let me see.
I will also agree with that. Sorry to take away Zach from your monologue.
No, you're fine. You're fine. I need all the help I can get.
Yeah.
It's been 6 months. I'm out of practice.
But I will agree that when I saw some early discussion of this album, people were kind of confused on why it was being considered this protest album. And even though, it's not explicitly this anti-Trump magnum opus, it inhabits this sort of atmosphere and it inhabits the sort of environment that Sirens a couple of years ago did for me, Nicholas Jar's last work before AAL, in that it sounds like music in revolt. It sounds like a piece of art that is able to encapsulate anxiety and encapsulate dread in this very melancholy and in soothing way that I think some of my favorite albums, Godspeed You Black Emperor, are really able to do. A lot of post-rock like Mogwai and Sigur Rós. And that makes sense because Low comes from that tradition of very ambient pop, very slowcore, post-rock linearity. And for them to go in a completely different creative direction with this and go full electronic, full glitch, it's really this incredible achievement of theirs, not only to highlight the versatility that they have as artists and as musicians, but also just being able to create something that speaks to the times that it inhabits. So I really, really love this album. I kind of put it on my list, my top 10, at the last minute. But it's really an incredible album. And I think it's Ben Frost's favorite record of the year as well, which is what really pushed me to pick it up and listen to it a few weeks ago, because he was just gushing about it on Instagram. And yeah, I love this album.
Yeah, Sirens is a really good touchstone that I didn't think of. The comparison that I draw is like Drums and Guns from 2007. That's my favorite Low album. Like, that came out in the very last years of the Bush presidency, and it was another very distinct sonic shift. After like years and years perfecting that Low sound, they just stripped everything down to its barest elements, and that, in much the same way, that was a response to that era's policies. This is a response to this era's policies and everything that's happening. And I think that there's something poetic about the expression being the way they express it, just like completely obscuring what they have to say. Like, songs like Tempest are basically illegible unless you have a lyric sheet in front of you. And there's something
I
poetic.
really love that too. I really love the way that the just the vocals are mixed on this, because sometimes they're indecipherable and sometimes they're just these very dreamy, soaring ballads, and they're juxtaposed onto this very chaotic or sometimes just very slow and again melancholy musical background. And it really adds, I feel, to the atmosphere of the album as a whole.
Yeah.
I think the balance of like bliss or like the detachment and this sort of impending doom that is lurking in the background is one of the sort of sonic techniques they're using that really allows this to be an album that like speaks to the present climate that we're living in.
Yeah. I could go on forever about the vocals on this, because there's just so many ways they're used. Like, sometimes they're obscured behind these sounds, sometimes they're heavily processed with like vocoders and auto-tune. Like, sometimes they aren't even really there, they're just sampled fragments of them, and that makes you appreciate the moments where you can actually hear them perfectly. You just appreciate them all the more. Like, that makes those moments absolutely breathtaking. Like on Quorum, when the noise falls away and it's just the piano and the vocals, that's probably my favorite musical moment of the year. It took my breath away when I first heard it. It still takes my breath away today. And it's just like 25 years Low have been doing this. They've been mining this. They've been mining a completely different sound. And instead of just being content with that, they decide to blow everything up and bury everything in noise and say, this is what we think about the world today. This is how we envision the world today. And it's like, you need to listen to this, because this perfectly captures our take on the world. And I think I'm rambling, but you know what? There was actually something one of my friends, Nat, said, that's Framing the Pick on Twitter. They're amazing. And they said, like, they find that there's brutality and ugliness in the noise, but they do that without sacrificing the beauty and pain that's there too. And that's what makes this such an astonishing album to me. I think that this is going to be the seminal record for me when I think about, like, of the decade, I guess. I might put it up there right now as my number one. It's definitely my number one here, and I'm glad that I had a bit of a chance to talk about it, even if it's coming out all mixed up and confused. So that's double negative, I guess. Please listen to it, and please read what I have to say about it when the write-up goes up tomorrow. Thank you.
And yeah, but hey, by the way, we again, I didn't talk about it on the last podcast, but hey, we're gonna be again tomorrow, which is gonna be probably today. Well, when this podcast goes up, Zach's will go up, and that'll be number 21 of 21 reps that we've done thus far. Every day we've gotten one up every day, and we're doing it into January on Indieheads. Read my palm right up because again, I wrote basically a Vonnegut fanfic for one of my favorite albums of the year, Palm Rock Island, which sadly did not make this list, and I'm very mad that y'all do not appreciate rock and roll music with guitars, especially with guitars that sound like steel drums. I very much
appreciate the math guitars. Thank you very much, Matty. You know this.
Yes.
You know this.
Yes.
All right.
But nevertheless,
Vice President Travis Scott demands that you read Matty's album.
Yes. Yes. But nevertheless, speaking of rock and roll music with guitars, Dill, what is number 8 on our album of the year list thus far?
Our number 8 album of the year is the rip-roaring, homophobe bashing, just incredible punk rock, in your face, Idol's Joy as an Act of Resistance. I fucking love this album. Everyone that I have talked to about this has ended up absolutely loving this record, and there's so much to love about this. There's so much energy, there's so much passion in it, there's so many incredible lyrical moments on this, not to mention the fact that it's just so bombastic, it's so creative, and it's so just encapsulates the ethos of punk, I feel, in this very freeing, independent, and liberating way. You have songs that everybody has been quoting for months. You have Colossus, you have Never Find a Man with a Perm, you have Danny Nedelko, you have stuff that is just so crushing, like Rottweiler, the closing track on this. You have really other great cuts that I love, like Television and Great, and just all around, it's a fantastic package, start to finish. And where our last record, where Double Negative was so much more encapsulating the feeling of the time and the anxiety and the dread, Joy as an Act of Resistance is the exact opposite of that, while still fulfilling a similar role, in that it really takes from its title and its moniker of being this act of resistance, this joyous act of resistance, and taking pride in just being these rebellious figures against anything that is wanting to face off against, the rise of fascism and the decay of neoliberal ideology, and in still embracing the power of marginalized people, and embracing the power of punks and outsiders and weirdos in just such a celebrating fashion that everybody that I have talked to I've been able to turn on to this. And regardless of your personal background or your social standing about that, everybody I know just loves this record because it encapsulates the ethos of punk to a T, being able to create this grand platform for anybody to communicate with each other and build and just get together with. And I think it's really become a really beautiful record, not only to listen to, but also to discuss, to love over. I hear that the band's live performances are absolutely amazing, and I wish they would. Yes. I wish that they would come to Texas and have some Texas shows or somewhere down the South, because oh my God, I would lose my mind there. But it's front to back, again, it's an incredible record, and just a great, outstanding achievement for this year.
I liked when he compared himself to Stone Cold Steve Austin, because he puts the homophobes in coffins. I like that because it appealed to the things that I like. What do you have to say? You have to say anything?
There's so many different things in that one line that are happening all at once, and you know what? I'm down for all of it. It's again, it is the best, absolutely most in-your-face, homophobe bashing, queer loving, 5 people in a punk band just loving the shit out of each other. And you know what? I want idols. What Lily did a tweet earlier, or she said something about I like Queer Eye, except it's with idols, and they're just going around into London shops and just crushing everything while saying anti-capitalist slogans.
Sweetie, you look like a walking thyroid. Okay, we got to change that look.
But yeah, that's pretty much all. I've exhausted pretty much all I have to say about it.
I'll take the reins, because I did see them live earlier this year, and it was a great fucking show. I had a fucking blast, and it did, and like preparing for that show, like listening to the album, it made me love the album so much more, because I was like, you know, fuck it, I'll go see Idols. It seems like it'll be a fun show. I like the record enough, and then just like kept listening to the record. I'm like, wow, this is fucking good. And this is something that wasn't like, I couldn't really get into Brutalism like other people could. Like, it just, whatever it was, like I like some of the songs, but just the entire album just was not hitting me. But this one, like, balls to the wall, fucking hits me. Like, Colossus, like, might be top 5 intros for the year for me. Like, that is a fucking killer way to start your album off.
Oh, absolutely. And it was a killer single to also lead off with, too.
It definitely was, like, a good representation, sort of what they're... It's weird that like, they're considered post-punk. I still find that a little odd, because I do consider them more like hardcore punk than anything else. Like, that's generally the direction they go in. And the closest thing to post-punk is like, yeah, it's like Colossus. Like, the beginning part of that is just like all these moving parts just coming together. You have, you know, Joe Talbot's vocals, who's, again, like I said, Joe Talbot, like, holy fucking shit. This dude, he's really good. He really knows how to yell the things that I want to hear. Like, yeah! Go off, King. Go off. Fuck. And then, again, the band just, like, oh my god, Colossus, it's just such a beautiful song. And then, of course, like, it has this it's coming, refrain that just keeps coming in. The band, it's just, the tempo is going up and up and up. And you're like, what the fuck's gonna happen? And then just, it all cuts out. And you're like, what's going on? And then, of course, 1, 2, 3, 4 launches into fucking hardcore punk media. And he's comparing himself to all these fucking, like, celebrities. And just being like, fuck you. You're a homophobe. I'm going to beat the shit out of you. You're a fucking xenophobe. Fuck you. You like capitalism? Get the fuck out of here. I'm going to fucking punch you in the throat. Fucking rule. Fucking rules. And that's, of course, and that's just, one track. Like, the rest of the album is like, really, really great. Like, one of my favorite parts about this album is that the bass on this album is so fucking good. It's so out there in the foreground, which I think a lot of bands, they don't really do a lot. Like, the stuff that I generally do, the bass is more of, it just sort of goes along with the percussion and just sort of is, like, you kind of really have to listen for it to really hear, like, the intricacies of it. But this album, some of these songs just start off with, like, just some of the most killer bass lines, like, I've ever fucking... It might be, like, Television, I think. I can't quite remember if it's that one. But nevertheless, this album is really fucking good, and, like, one that I'm, like, very glad to have on this list. And again, if Idols are touring near you, go see Idols. Fucking amazing show. One of my favorite live shows I've seen this year. And one that I can't believe, like, I forgot that I put on my... Because there was, like, some top 5 shows you saw this year. I can't believe I forgot to put it on my list, because, like, shit, it was a fucking killer show. But that's all I have to say about this album. And I'm very glad it's number 8, unless there's any more thoughts before we move on to number 7.
It's the kind of mask energy we can support in this world. This is the best masculinity.
It's positive masculinity, the album.
Yeah,
that's basically what it is. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. All right. I guess number 7. We're on to number 7 now. And one that is, again, very high on my own personal list, and one, of course, I am very happy makes this list. And one that, if it was going to make our list. It's going to make every fucking list, because of course it is, because it's that fucking good, let me tell you. And, of course, number 7, I'm talking about Mitski, Be the Cowboy, her 5th sixth album, I want to say, or sort of her third since like the breakout of Makeout Creek. And this album, love this album. It is, like I said, it's very high on my personal album of the year list, and rightfully so, because it's about a little over half an hour of just killer song after killer song. And it's sort of it's an interesting departure in some ways from her last record, where Puberty 2 is much more of a, I would say, sort of at least the way it flows in some of the songs is more of a traditional album. You kind of have stuff that, you know, you're more traditional songwriting, but this one is, it sort of takes a more, I mean, obviously a more pop approach, but sort of really condenses that into a really interesting package where a lot of these songs, like I said, it's like 14, 15 tracks, and most of them are only around like 2 minutes long. As again, they get in, they get out, you know, like it's generally like you have your verses, you have a chorus or two, and then it sort of gets in, gets out. Like there's not much else. And we talked about this album a little bit on the last podcast, because we did talk about Nobody, which was our song of the year pick. But nevertheless, there again, the run this album has, like usually like once an album starts off, usually, you know, it goes for about 4 or 5 tracks, and then, you know, it falls off a teensy bit. You know, maybe there's one track that I don't like as much, but from Geyser to like Nobody, or it's just great song after great song, and like various different kind of mini styles. Like Geyser, of course, is a more like kind of traditional Mitski track, where it's just sort of has this like, again, some prominent like synth key stuff, and it's just loud and bombastic, and of course it has a slow build to it, and it's just amazing. And then of course you have like Why Don't You Stop Me, which is just sort of like a really awesome synth pop track with some horns, aka it's a ska song. So ska song of the year is Why Don't You Stop Me. That's my case. If Gavin wants to refute that, he can DM me after this podcast goes out, and then we can you know, chat it out on the next podcast he's on. But nevertheless, I guess just like Old Friend, A Pearl, Lonesome Love, Remember My Name, Me and My Husband, Come in the Water, Nobody, just like, holy fucking shit, how did she keep doing this? Like, every time I listen to this album, I'm just like completely blown away of just like, how the fuck does she keep like going? Like albums, even albums that I love, they eventually have to take a break, and they have to kind of take some room to breathe. And she does in some cases. Like there's some more ballady tracks and not more explicit indie pop tracks. But still, like, god damn, this album fucking... Lily, you want to take it from here? Like, I gotta take a step back and, like, get some more thoughts in my brain that are not rambling.
Sure, I'll see if I can get some takes out. I have the same problem with this album that Zach has with Double Negative, in that, like, there's so much going on here that is so emotionally loaded for me that I really have trouble, like, articulating my feelings about this album, which... I like, again, to speak to the emotionally loaded point, I think I listened to 3 times in the month after it came out, because every time I was just like shaken to my core of like, there are so many lines on this album that just feel like ripped right out, like directly from my experience of this year, which is like, that's a very personal thing. But I think one thing, because there's, now that it's sort of become the consensus album of the year, there's a lot of Mitski discourse going around. And something about this album that I haven't really seen brought up in all of that is something it does that is so important, I think, is it really portrays the way that like politics are imposed on like the desires of women. Like women aren't allowed to like express agency and desire and vulnerability and ambition in like a free way. And I think that's what, you know, obviously the archetype of the cowboy speaks to. And this album just conveys that so well, the way that like these minute experiences are so loaded with like these frameworks of identity and power and all these dynamics that are informing what are these otherwise very benign experiences. And also through the way she conveys that lyrically, I think on this album, Mitski proves herself to be like one of the great minimalist storytellers of this generation. Like stuff like A Pearl, Come Into the Water, Pink in the Night, the way they're able to convey these narratives in these situations with very, very little, both lyrically and instrumentally, is just a testament to really like how, you know, I remember it was like a few years ago, Iggy Pop like played Mitski on his radio show and said that she's the most advanced American songwriter he knows of right now. And every track on this album just proves that. Like, advanced is really the right word for it. It is so sophisticated and complex and ambitious without sacrificing any of its immediacy and any of its resonance. And like, I'm sure we talked nobody to death on the last episode. I sadly missed out on that and choked the last time I got to talk about it. But the songwriting on that song, that is a difficult song to write and play and perform, and that she's able to make it sound like one of the breeziest jams of the year, to the point where people are like accusing it of being too simple, when in fact structurally it is like anything but, while still being this masterclass in like pop song structure. Again, it just proves the point of what a high level she's operating on throughout this album. And I think that's part of why these songs get to me so much, is that they're not only saying something very personally resonant to me, but they're doing it in a way that like amplifies that message so much more. I probably lost my train of thought at this point. I could just throw superlatives at this album all day. It's really incredible, and it really means a lot to me. And I think it's no surprise to me that, like, you know, in speaking privately with other women, like, this album struck a chord with so many of this. Like, this album is really saying something important about like the contemporary feminine experience in a way that is also, like, you know, not alienating listeners who aren't women, because it's still doing it through just like these fundamental primal emotions and experiences that like anyone can latch onto, regardless of you know, the specific perspective she's coming from with those songs. And I think that's a really, really special thing.
Yeah, like, not much to disagree with there. Like I said, much more articulate, because again, my dumb bird brain is just like, these songs remind me of stuff that happened in my life, and I get real sad about it. That's great. But again, I really, like I said, I might have mentioned this on the last episode, but like I said, when this album came out, I was not that into it. Like, it was just like, you know, it came out, I'm like, oh, this is it? Like, it's just like all these songs are just like, they're coming and going. I'm like, as soon as I started to get like really into the songs, they just kind of disappear, and it's like, oh, okay, interesting. But again, I just kept listening over and over again. Just like I said, the genius, which I'm just gonna say, it's fucking genius album. The genius, like, it pops out of just like, holy fucking shit, she's operating on like such a different level than anybody else right now. Like, as you were saying, just like taking, you know, these pop song structures but doing something really unique with them that you know, they don't take away from God, even I'm having trouble. It doesn't take away from the pop elements. It doesn't try to be like, oh, I'm going to take like these pop song structures and I'm going to turn them completely on their head. Like, she's still working within the framework of pop music, like, you know, still working that framework, but again, just doing really interesting things. Like I was mentioning earlier, a lot of these songs, they kind of just get in and they get out in the best possible way. They don't, I would say almost none of the songs in this album overstay their welcome in any shape or form. Like, essentially, it's sort of like, I kind of wonder what the creative process was behind this, because of course there's songs on our previous albums that are a bit more, I'm not going to say fleshed out, but again, they're much more, again, like lengthier and sort of, you know, do a bit more. But this is just sort of her being like, okay, what is the absolute, like, here's what I need to do in this song, and here's how I'm going to do it in the most efficient and in sometimes like fastest way possible. And it's an album that very much represents sort of in some ways modern listening standards, where it still is very much this whole complete album, but at the same time it does know that, hey, like, the public's attention spans, they can be pretty damn low at times, and it's just sort of working within that in a really interesting way. I think it's something that I've heard brought up a lot about like Whack World that came out earlier this year, which I've not gotten around to just yet, but just more of what I've heard, where essentially it's just sort of like, you know, if I remember correctly, I read an article about short albums the other day by someone I'm mutuals with on Vibe, and it was just sort of like, she would be in the car with her friends, and it would just be like, you know, the first minute of the song is the only part of the song they would like really listen to, and then after that they would zone out and talk about something else or want to play the next track. And I feel like that's doing what Tierwhack is kind of doing that for like hip hop. You know, Mitski is sort of doing that for, you know, indie rock, indie pop, and pop music, and it's really fascinating, and I'm really interested to see where she goes from here, not only on her own, but also for songwriting for other artists, as I think in a Pitchfork feature earlier this year, she mentioned that she was getting ready to go in the studio with Ali X and work on some songs. And so I'm really interested to see how that works out and see who she ends up writing for in the future, because I do think like I do think like, hey, like some of the songs on this album, like, hey, if you handed some of these songs to like some really, like if you had like Nobody to like a Taylor Swift or I'm trying to think of like, yeah, Taylor Swift or an Ariana Grande, like that song would be a guaranteed like smash hit, you know. So I'm very interested to see where she goes on this album, and it's really fucking great. And I would be remiss not to mention Two Slow Dancers for our beautiful boy Jackson, who could not be on this podcast. I must mention Two Slow Dancers, which again, for as an outro, is not totally my top cup of tea. I still think it's a very good song. It's still a very good way to end off the album. And I do think like to end the album, end an album that is as high energy as this album gets at times, it's good to have a sort of a way to like decompress a little bit and just sort of like take a step back and go for a more traditional kind of slow ballad route that I do think is a good way to end the album. Even though, of course, I'm a big fan of just like going out on a fucking high note, going all the way, ball out, fuck it, boom. So yeah, that's all I have to say about Be the Cowboy. Was there any other thoughts before we move on to our number 6?
Just on the note of Two Slow Dancers, shout out to Blue Light, a track that does not get its dues for being able to segue smoothly between Washing Machine Heart, which is like punchy, up-tempo, really like sarcastic and biting indie rock music, into the balladry of Two Slow Dancers. And I love that Blue Light is just this like simple little track that so perfectly conveys sort of, I don't want to say a break in sanity, but like it is the sound of Mitski on her own, just sort of like,
oh yeah, Blue Light is
drifting off and cooing to herself. And like, I love the lyrics of "Someone Kiss Me, I'm Going Crazy," like cleaning the apartment naked. She just puts you in that scenario so well and evokes it perfectly. And it makes for a really great bridge between what are like, I never even realized until I looked at the track listing, two very tonally different tracks.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like, I feel like Blue Light is, I mean, the entire album, like, she's talking about, you know, like, very common things like loneliness, wanting to be kissed and kissing people, which is, you know, hey, I don't know about y'all, but kissing some cool-ass shit. And then, like, you know, like, exes and romance and falling in love and just, like, living in a society, you know. And, like, Blue Light is, like, sort of this last, like, desperate push of this album, because again, there's a lot of songs in this album where she talks about like wanting to be kissed, and like for some it's repetitive, like that theme specifically, but it's like, but is she wrong though? Like, yeah, it's repetitive because it's just like, because it be like that sometimes, you know, like, and I think it's intentional too with like going Blue Light into Two Slow Dancers, where even she's starting to realize like, hey, I'm being kind of repetitive here. And just sort of like the cowbell and all these like kind of noises going on in the background, and eventually goes into the do before it just sort of has this fade out where it's just like, okay, like even I have to decompress a little bit, and I have to kind of like, you know, sort of have this moment where I just need to like sit, you know, take a step out of my body and just kind of relax a little, not really relax, but just sort of take a step back and just think about everything, you know, and not go so intense about this stuff. And Two Slow Dancers is definitely like a more sort of a slowly intense song, but definitely not to the level of like, you know, like a Nobody or Why Didn't You Stop Me or Washing Machine Heart or, you know, like a Pearl. But yeah, like I said, there's a lot. I love this album so much. There's a lot to discuss. There's so many tracks, and like all of them are like so fucking good. And unless anyone else has any other thoughts, I'm very glad to have this in our top 10 at number 7. And do we want to move on to number 6?
Just to put a very final button in it, I think what we're getting at here is that Blue Light sort of sums up the level of like structural and conceptual precision and control that Mitski is exerting throughout this whole album, which is exactly what makes it so great.
It's desperate, but it's like purposely so. I mean, a lot of the album is like desperation.
I said put a button.
But we're putting
talked about it too much.
We're putting a button. All right, we're putting a button in it. We're getting our button up, crop tops on. We're going down to the local barn throwdown. All right, it's a hoe down, throw down. Miley Cyrus, number 6 on our list. What is number 6, Zach, on our top 10 albums of 2018?
The number 6 album on our top 10 list is Casey Musgraves' Golden Hour.
Yeehaw!
Yes, thank you. That's it. That's the podcast.
This is the real cowboy album. Let's make this clear right now.
I'm going to be leading this one again because our dear boy Jackson couldn't be here. I apologize in advance. This is going to be clunky. Let me see. I think what I appreciate most about this album is that it doesn't try to reinvent the wheel. Like, there are some elements that are pretty weird for a mainstream country album, but on the whole, the strength is in the songwriting, the performances. This is something that, like, you can imagine an alternate universe Willie Nelson putting this out, or maybe Waylon Jennings, somebody like that, the people who are, like, the bedrock of the genre.
A lot of
Casey
Dolly
does.
Parton.
Yeah.
I think Casey's constantly been compared to Dolly Parton.
Duh.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
I see a lot of Lucinda Williams on here as well, a songwriter that I really adore.
Most definitely.
Yeah, you can also see some, maybe some Blaze Foley, maybe some, it's all around. I think it's an incredible record. I don't think it got nearly as much maybe indie hype as maybe something like Sturgill Simpson did. I don't think maybe it had as the songwriting chops that maybe someone like Jason Isbell does. And I also don't think, I constantly comparing it to other contemporary country artists kind of feels unfair to this record, because it definitely has that blend of pop music with country, but it doesn't do so in the Garth Brooks kind of way that I think people will just be really turned off by. And it's certainly not the traditional contemporary Nashville sound that seems like Golden Hour really tries to rebuke a whole lot of the time. It's really just depends entirely on how Casey's able to take her storytelling and her songwriting and take her illusionary and narrative powers and be able to convey that through the medium. And I think it does so in a way that not only upholds and invokes the tradition of country music and folk music dating all the way back to, Willie Nelson and Waylon Jennings and what have you, but also does it in a very modern sounding way. There's a lot of stuff that she takes here from, maybe country or dance music and electronic music in a little bit, and also indie pop and indie rock and all these other different forms of, modern sounds without making it sound, cliche, without making it sound tacky or making it sound cheap. And I think a lot of that also does lend itself to the production on this, which is just absolutely pristine and flawless in my opinion. It's crystal clear. She comes through super well and really upholds the record just super, super well. And I really love that about it. And as for Casey herself, I love her voice. There's always been a lot of talk about how good of a vocalist she is, and it really shines here, I think, better than it did on a few of her other previous records. And the way that the record was also able to balance these great ballads and singles and upbeat songs and flip that around with these very, soothing, down tempo, just simple acoustic pieces, is really fantastic. And the pacing of the album and the track listing of the album and the way that each track flows with one another is really a solid just addition to it as well. So all around, it's a fantastic package, and I'm really happy that it was able to make it into the top 10 in general. But to make it into the top 6, I think was really fantastic for it.
Yeah, like I think this is probably one of the breakout successes of the music year. I think like
Absolutely.
and people like Will, obviously they do have gripes because Pageant Material, Same Trailer, Different Park, those were also really good albums, and it's like, why is this one the one that gets the attention? And
Yeah.
those are valid criticisms. I'll give him that. But like something about the way this record sounds, something the way that it stands out in a mainstream Nashville scene that's all about loud, big, fast. Like I remember reading this article, and it was about the Country Music Awards, and there was this bit about how like Casey performing Slow Burn was just so different because compared to everything else, this gentle, beautiful acoustic number about like life and growing up being performed in such a big time arena just felt different. It's a shock to the system, and in a very quiet way, it's a little revolutionary, I think. Like, I'm obviously thrilled it's been nominated for Album of the Year at the Grammys. I'm obviously thrilled that it's made it in the top 10 of our list. It's just it's as close to a perfect album as I've heard all year. And like, this is going a little bit off the trail, I think, especially compared to Dying Star by Rustin Kelly, he's Casey's husband, and I hear a lot of this album.
Did he really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. Like I hear a lot of this album and that album and vice versa. I think that I don't really know where I'm going with this, but it shows that. Yeah, I really have no idea where I'm going with this. I guess I just wanted to shout out Rustin Kelly. I don't know.
Yeah, I think to really quickly just mention on something you brought up earlier about Pageant Material sort of not getting as much attention as Golden Hour is. I think this year was really Casey's moment to shine, mainly because the other sort of three main alt country stars, if you want to label them such, didn't really put anything out. Jason Isbell just had a live album at the end of the year. I don't think Chris Stapleton did anything.
Songs for Stars Born.
Yeah, and as for, I think Sturgill hasn't done anything in a couple of years either. And I think when Pageant Material came out, I think it was either Metamodern Sounds was getting a huge push, or Sailor's Guide to Earth had just dropped or something like that. So certainly this was Casey's year to really make a name for herself for the people who didn't already know her, but was still into that sort of alt country, Nashville established sound. So that's all I'm gonna say. She's had a really great year, and I'm really proud and happy of her. And again, shades of Lucinda Williams. I think maybe Hooray for the Riff Raff is a decent contemporary to maybe compare her to. But
yeah, I can see that.
Still on a league. Yeah, that's all I have to say. I'm done.
Yeah, like between this, Pistol Annie's having a very successful record in their own right. Brandi Carlile also getting nominated for Album of the Year. I think that this could be, looking back, a very big year for artists who aren't men in the country world. I hope that's what happens at least. And I think Golden Hour is an album that's going to stand out as the representative. So yeah, that's our number 6 album of the year. It's really good. Good year.
Yeah. Again, I don't have much to add. Just again, I guess I just haven't got to spend the time with this album, but I did listen to it a few weeks ago on like a nice sort of like late afternoon. Sun was kind of coming down as I was driving to class, and just really fucking hate. Like Lonely Weekend is just god damn. And then of course like High Horse, which is just this fucking amazing disco country track that like just works so well. But again, not much to add. Just one that I'm very glad to have on this list. As I mean, right away, like I mean, let's see, we have like Sophie, which is just like this insane electronic pop album. We have Double Negative, which is like distorted slowcore. Joy is an Act of Resistance, like British hardcore punk. Be the Cowboy, really just like stellar indie pop, and then Golden Hour, which is a great pop country record. And yeah, that's all. That is part 1 of our top 10 of the year. Come back in a couple of days, maybe later this weekend, as we will have number 5 through number 1 to complete our top 10 of 2018. And yeah, that will about do it for us for this episode. This is probably be our shortest episode that we put out in at least 2 years. But hey, look, this is a good thing. This is something we should be doing going forward. But yeah, nevertheless, we will see you guys on the next episode. And yeah, peace out.